Let's now put Tony Liu's account in some wider context. Professor Maria Fiatarone Singh is a geriatrician at Sydney University and a member of Doctors Against Forced Organ Harvesting. She's written academic articles on that topic, forced organ harvesting in China, and testified before the China Tribunal. She joins me now. Thank you so much for your time. For us here in Australia, I mean, listening to that sort of account and some of the claims being made seems unbelievable. Is it really happening?
Oh, it's definitely happening. I mean, it's been in the news since 2006, but I think it's taken quite a while for mainstream media to actually latch onto it. But the evidence is overwhelming, and there's no evidence that it's actually diminishing with time. The numbers, the volume of transplants in hospitals is actually increasing every year.
Now, what evidence is there for? Part of it, I think, is because the Chinese started, the regime picked on the Falun Gong in particular, and people here think, oh, that's just a crazy sect, they don't want to even get close and listen to them. But what hard evidence is there that it really did happen, or does happen?
It does happen. Well, initially there were reports by surgeons themselves that they were actually using Falun Gong practitioners because they were healthier than other Chinese, or certainly healthier than people who were condemned to death and being executed for their organs. And there were also whistleblowers, people who actually were working in the transplant hospitals and gave reports. And there were also phone calls that were made by investigators who actually presented themselves as relatives of somebody who needed an organ, and actually asked whether or not the hospital would have Falun Gong organs because they would be perceived to be healthier. And there were many hospitals that in fact admitted that yes, they had these organs available. And I think one of the strongest points is that because you can get an organ so quickly in China compared to other countries, you're essentially killing somebody on demand for the transplant, which is very different, as you know, from Australia, where you would have to wait 3 to 5 years for a kidney, for example. You can get that in a matter of weeks in China.
Wow, wow. Look, and I hear what you're saying because I've got a friend who performs that kind of surgery at a top level. I know those waits, and I find it extraordinary. You can almost, you know, get an organ while you wait. How many in China, right, how many people roughly do you think have been killed for their organs?
It's very difficult to say. The most up-to-date report is called The Update by David Mattis and Kilgore and Ethan Gutman, and they've actually looked at the 714 or so hospitals that are allowed to do transplants in China, although there's probably a few more. And they've estimated, just based on Chinese website publications of how many beds there are and how many operations are occurring, that somewhere between 60 and 100,000 transplants are occurring every year currently. And we know that there have been transplants going on in China since a little bit since the 70s, and certainly in more vast numbers since about 1999. So you can add up the numbers, and the Chinese government currently says that there's about 10,000 transplants a year, but there's no verification that that's the truth, and that number of transplants would happen in 1 or 2 of the large hospitals. So it scores above that for sure.
And we've been talking about the Falun Gong now. There's 900,000 Muslim Uyghurs being rounded up, according to the latest evidence. This leaks to the New York Times, for instance, from within the Chinese regime. Right. There are fears that those will be another group of people who will be subjected to organ harvesting. You got any evidence on that?
Well, there isn't as much evidence. There is evidence that their DNA samples are being taken, and there are people who've been let out of the detention centers who have indicated, just like you heard from Tony, that they're being blood tested and their organs are being scanned, ultrasounds are being done of their kidneys, etc. So they seem to be undergoing the same kinds of medical tests at the same time that they're being tortured. So obviously this isn't a health checkup, and certainly there are more and more indications that people are coming from other countries, Saudi Arabia and other countries, to China because of the ready supply of these kinds of organs. So I think there's no evidence that it's stopping, and the tribunal, as you mentioned, found very credible evidence that it's been going on, targeting particularly Falun Gong, but also Tibetans and house Christians as well.
Well, Chinese surgeons, etc., are being stopped from going to international meetings, etc., to put pressure on China. I think that has to, those bans have to be coming back very quick, smart. Maria Fiatarone Singh, thank you so much indeed for putting that into context. It's shameful
My pleasure.
what's happening. Thank you.